Have you ever been out in the wilderness, far from civilization, and just felt it? That prickle on the back of your neck, like you're being watched, even when you know you're alone? That's the feeling we're tapping into tonight. Because for all the official trails and safety guides, there are places in our national parks the maps don't show. Things that go unexplained, and people who just vanish. If you've ever wondered about those missing person files, or just felt that deep, primal unease when a familiar path suddenly feels wrong, then you're in the right place. Tonight, we uncover the horrifying truth behind some of the most unsettling stories from America's most beautiful and most dangerous wild places. These real accounts will make you question everything you thought you knew about nature. Take a moment to check if you're subscribed. We wouldn't want you to miss out on the next bone-chilling true horrors from places you thought were safe. It was late July when I headed out to the Sentinel Peak Wilderness. My plan was a simple solo backpacking trip. 3 days, 2 nights, nothing too strenuous. Just me, my pack, and the vast, whispering quiet of the mountains. I've always found a strange comfort in solitude, especially out in nature. It's like the world pauses and you can actually hear yourself think, the first day was perfect. The sun shone bright, but the air was crisp. I hiked a good 10 miles, finding a perfect spot by a small, gurgling creek for my first night. I set up my tiny tent, cooked a simple meal over my little stove, and watched the stars pop out one by one, impossibly bright without the city lights. I fell asleep to the gentle lullaby of the creek and the chirping of crickets, feeling completely at peace. The second morning started just as beautifully. I packed up, eager to tackle the ascent to Sentinel Peak itself. The trail was well maintained at first, winding through towering pines that smelled like sunshine and resin. But as I gained elevation, the path grew rockier, narrower, and less distinct. The trees thinned out, replaced by a sparse, wind-scoured landscape. That's when I noticed the silence. It wasn't just the absence of human noise, it was an unnatural quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, not even the buzz of insects. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, though the sky was clear. I remember stopping, taking a deep breath, and feeling a prickle of unease on my arms. It was too quiet. I consulted my map, figuring I was about halfway up the peak. The final ascent looked steep but manageable. As I started moving again, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was too indistinct to make out any words, just a soft, drawn-out shhh. I stopped again, straining my ears. Nothing. I shrugged it off, probably just the wind playing tricks in the sparse rock formations. The higher I climbed, the more pronounced the feeling of being watched became. Not by an animal, but by something else. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my eyes scanning the ancient, gnarled trees and the silent rock faces. The whispering sound returned, a little clearer this time, more like a sigh. It seemed to come from all directions, swirling around me. Whoosh, shhh, my heart started to pound a little faster. This wasn't the comforting quiet of nature anymore. It was an oppressive, expectant silence. I pulled out my phone, no signal, of course. I considered turning back, but the idea seemed irrational. I was almost at the summit, and it was still broad daylight. It was just my imagination, right? The solitude getting to me, I pushed on, determined to reach the peak. The air grew colder, even though the sun was still high. My breath plumed in front of me. That's when the echoes started. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were distinct sounds, repeated moments after they happened. I'd kick a loose stone, and a second later, I'd hear the clink-clatter echo from further up the peak, almost as if someone else had just done the same thing, just out of sight. I'd carefully place my foot and hear the soft thud reverberate. It was like I was walking through a recording of my own movements, played back with a delay, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature trickled down my spine. This wasn't normal. Mountain echoes are usually sharp and distinct, bouncing off distant cliffs, not repeating your own quiet movements from directly ahead of you. I picked up my pace, a frantic need to get to the top and get down, overriding my earlier apprehension. I broke through the last line of stunted trees, and there it was, the summit. A flat, rocky expanse marked by a cairn of stones. The wind howled here, a mournful, empty sound. And despite the wind, the silence was still there. Deeper than ever, I walked to the cairn, placing my hand on the cold stones. And then I heard it right behind me, a breath, a soft, measured inhale, not an echo. Not the wind, I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. My own breath hitched in my throat. I didn't dare turn around immediately. I could feel the cold, heavy presence directly behind me, so close I imagined I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the awful stillness. Then, the whispering came again, directly into my ear. It wasn't the wind's shhh from before. This was a guttural, wet sound, like something struggling to speak or breathe, and then a perfect, clear echo of what it whispered. "Run," it rasped, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone, and instantly, from all around me, a chorus of voices, impossibly close, yet disembodied, hissed the echo. "Run, run, run." It was the whispers from earlier. I realized, the sighs, the shhh sounds, they weren't the wind. They were the repeated, overlapping echoes of that single, awful word. They were coming from everywhere, from the very air itself. Panic, cold and sharp, finally seized me. I didn't think, I just moved. I scrambled away from the cairn, heart bursting in my chest, and started sprinting back down the way I'd come. I stumbled, nearly fell, my pack bouncing awkwardly. Every single sound I made, my heavy breathing, the crunch of my boots on gravel, the scrape of my pack, was instantly echoed, multiplied, amplified by the silent air around me. Gasp, gasp, gasp. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was a nightmare symphony of my own fear. I didn't care about the trail anymore, just about getting away. I slid down rocky inclines, tearing my clothes, scraping my hands. The echoing sounds pursued me, the whoosh of my arm swinging, the thump of my foot landing. Each sound like a hand reaching out for me. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line, back onto the well-worn path from the day before, my lungs burning, legs aching, and mind reeling. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of the lower forest chirping birds, rustling leaves, the distant murmur of the creek. I hiked the rest of the way out in a daze, barely registering my surroundings. I didn't even set up my tent again. I just slept curled up in my sleeping bag in the back of my car, shivering despite the summer night. I haven't been back to Sentinel Peak since. Sometimes, even now, when the house is quiet or I'm alone in a particularly still place, I'll take a deep breath. And for a split second, I swear I can hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, somewhere just at the edge of my hearing, an echo. And I remember that awful chorus, that chilling reverberation of a single word, urging me to run. And I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't listened to the echoes of Sentinel Peak? What was truly following me, whispering its chilling command? The air in Glacier National Park, even in early June, was crisp and bitingly cold once the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. I remember it clearly. The scent of pine needles and damp earth was so potent it felt like you could taste it. I'd grown up in flat, sprawling suburbs, so a solo backpacking trip through one of America's crown jewels was a big deal. My tent was pitched perfectly, or so I thought, near a designated backcountry campsite, nestled amongst some ancient firs. It was my first night out, and honestly, I was a mix of nervous excitement and pure exhilaration earlier that day, checking in at the ranger station. An old-timer with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too many sunsets had given me my permit. His name tag read Ranger Miller. As he handed me the laminated card, he leaned in, his voice a low rumble. "First time out here solo, son?" I nodded, feeling a little self-conscious about my brand new gear. "First time in a park this big, yeah?" He paused, studying me. "You read the pamphlets, right? About bears, mountain lions, staying on marked trails? Of course, I replied, a bit too quickly. He gave a slow nod, then his gaze drifted past me, out the window towards the towering forest. Good, because those aren't the only things to worry about out here. There are other things, things that don't like being found. He paused again, a long, uncomfortable silence. You hear anything strange tonight? Anything that doesn't sound quite right with the forest? You stay in your tent, you keep your light off, and you don't, under any circumstances, look outside. His voice had dropped to a near whisper on that last part, and a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air traced its way up my spine. I tried to laugh it off. What, like Bigfoot? Ranger Miller didn't crack a smile. His eyes, though, were intensely serious. Just remember what I said. The mountains hold old secrets. Some secrets don't like visitors. He straightened up then, as if realizing he'd said too much, and clapped me on the shoulder, a forced smile now on his lips. Have a good trip. Be safe. His words, initially shrugged off as eccentric ranger lore, played on a loop in my mind as darkness swallowed the last hint of twilight. Inside my tent, the air quickly became cold, and I bundled into my sleeping bag, trying to focus on the peaceful sounds of the wilderness. The wind rustled through the pines, a gentle, hypnotic hiss. An owl hooted in the distance, a classic sound of the wild. I must have drifted off because the next sound that registered wasn't natural. It was a rhythmic thumpy thump. Not heavy footsteps, but something lighter, almost a deliberate padding. It sounded like it was coming from the edge of my campsite, just beyond the thin nylon of my tent. My heart rate immediately picked up. Bear, mountain lion. I froze, straining my ears. The padding continued, slow and methodical. It wasn't a squirrel, not a deer. It was too intentional. Then it stopped. A dead silence fell over the forest, more profound than before. The wind seemed to hold its breath. The owl was silent, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. Not a human whisper, not exactly. It was more like the sound of dry leaves skittering across concrete or dry sticks being dragged over rock. It was formless, a sibilant hiss that seemed to snake its way into my tent, right into my ear. It wasn't saying words I could understand, but the intent behind it was clear. It was a question, an inquiry. And it was directed at me, my breath hitched in my throat. Ranger Miller's warning echoed. You hear anything strange, you stay in your tent, you keep your light off, and you don't, under any circumstances, look outside. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to zip open the tent flap, to shine my headlamp out there, to confront whatever was making that sound. Curiosity, fear, and a desperate need to know warred within me. But the whisper intensified, growing slightly louder, more insistent, more curious. It was like something was sniffing at the edges of my presence, trying to discern what I was, why I was there. Then there was a soft tap on the tent fabric, right beside my head. Just one tap. It was light, delicate, like a fingernail gently clicking. My eyes were wide open, staring into the impenetrable darkness of the tent. My hands were balled into fists inside my sleeping bag, knuckles white. The cold suddenly felt unbearable, seeping into my bones. The tapping stopped. The whisper, too. The deep silence returned, but this time it felt heavy, oppressive, as if something was holding its breath just outside. I lay there, rigid, for what felt like hours. Every shadow cast by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, every rustle of a branch in the distance, sent fresh jolts of terror through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, replaying Ranger Miller's grave expression, his low voice. When the first slivers of dawn painted the sky in faint purples and oranges, I finally allowed myself to move. My muscles screamed in protest from the tension. I slowly, carefully unzipped the tent. The campsite looked normal, pristine still. The pines stood tall, indifferent. There were no tracks, no disturbed pine needles, no sign that anything had been there at all. I packed up my tent faster than I ever thought possible, my fingers clumsy with lingering fear. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just walked, putting as much distance between myself and that campsite as I could. I completed my trip, but every shadow seemed deeper. Every whisper of wind sounded like a question. I never told Ranger Miller what I heard. When I checked out, he just nodded, his eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. Glad you made it back, son. Some don't. I don't know what was out there that night. I still don't. But the memory of that whispering and the gentle tap on my tent resurfaces every time I'm alone in the dark. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the core, that Ranger Miller wasn't talking about bears. He was talking about the things that linger in the deep places, the ancient somethings that don't like to be looked at, and certainly don't like to be found. And I swear, sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still hear a faint, sibilant whisper, just at the edge of hearing, asking a question I pray I never answer. If these tailies of the wilderness made your spine tingle, consider giving this video a like. It helps us know what kind of stories you want to hear next. The smell of pine and damp earth. That's the first thing I remember about that trip. It was late August, the kind of perfect summer day where the air hums with insects and the sunlight filters through the leaves in dizzying patterns. My best friend, Sam, and I had planned this camping trip to the Sequoia National Park for months. We were excited, ready to unplug, and just enjoy nature. We had a reservation for Campground 13, a relatively new site, tucked away deeper in the park than most. The park ranger at the entrance station even commented on it. /Campground 13, huh? It's pretty secluded back there. You'll have it mostly to yourselves. He'd smiled, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker I couldn't quite place. The drive-in was beautiful, but as we got closer to Campground 13, the trees seemed to grow denser, the light dimmer. When we finally pulled into our designated spot, it indeed felt isolated. Only a few other campers were scattered far off in the distance, barely visible through the thick canopy. We set up our tent, unpacked our gear, and by late afternoon, we had a small campfire crackling merrily. The air was turning cool, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with the forest. It was exactly what we'd hoped for. As dusk settled, the sounds of the forest began to amplify. The rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of ancient trees swaying in a gentle breeze. We roasted marshmallows, told silly stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. Around 10 p.m., tired but content, we decided to call it a night. That's when things started to change. I was just drifting off when I heard it for the first time. A sound, faint at first, like something dragging. It was rhythmic, steady, and seemed to be coming from the direction of the dense woods just beyond our campsite. I nudged Sam awake. Hey, do you hear that? He listened, his brow furrowed. Yeah, what is that? Sounds like someone dragging a branch. We waited, straining our ears. The sound continued, slowly growing louder. It wasn't just a branch. It sounded heavier, more deliberate. Then it stopped. The silence that followed felt enormous, pressing down on us. Just as we were about to dismiss it, a new sound emerged, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. It was incoherent, just a breathy murmur, but it was undeniably there, closer now. My heart began to pound against my ribs. Sam clutched my arm. His eyes were wide in the dim light filtering through the tent fabric. Did you hear that? Yes. I whispered back, my voice barely audible. We lay there, frozen, listening. The whispering grew slightly, a sibilant hiss that seemed to snake around our tent. It sounded like it was right outside, barely a foot away from us. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the tone, it was mournful, desperate, yet also somehow malevolent. Then, a new sound, a dull thud, like something bumping against the tent pole closest to my head. My breath hitched. Sam gasped. We instinctively pressed ourselves further into our sleeping bags as if they could offer protection. There was another thud, then another, rhythmic and soft, like a very slow, very deliberate drumming. Thump, 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 my mind raced. Animal? No animal made these sounds. A person? What kind of person would be out here in the dark, messing with our tent like this? The whispers started again, louder now, and woven into them, I heard a distinct syllable, mine. A chill shot through me that had nothing to do with the night air. It was a cold that started in my bones and spread outwards. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. Panic started to bubble up, but I forced it down. We had to stay calm. "Sam," I whispered, "what do we do?" He didn't answer. He was just breathing shallowly next to me, his eyes fixed on the tent wall. Then, a shadow fell across the outside of our tent, a huge, hulking shape that briefly blotted out the faint moonlight. It moved slowly, deliberately, passing from one side to the other. Whatever it was taller than a man and incredibly close. We could hear the faint sh of it dragging something along the ground as it moved. The whispers intensified, becoming a low, guttural growl, still incomprehensible, but undeniably laced with rage. The thumping against the tent grew more frantic, faster now, like something was trying to claw its way in. Then I heard it. A faint scratching sound, right at the base of the tent, near my head. Scratch, 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 it sounded like fingernails, long and sharp, dragging against the nylon. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry as dust. Sam let out a small whimper beside me. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I was anywhere but there. The air inside the tent felt heavy, oppressive, as if something was slowly sucking the oxygen out of it. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Suddenly, all the sounds stopped. The scratching, the thumping, the whispers, everything. The silence that descended was even more terrifying than the noise. It was a vacuum, an absence of sound that felt unnatural, wrong. We lay there, rigid, listening for what felt like an eternity. My heart was still hammering, but my mind was screaming at me to move, to run, to do anything. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the first rays of dawn began to pierce the dense canopy, painting the world in weak, watery light. We waited for a few more excruciating minutes. Then Sam slowly, shakily, reached for the zipper. I held my breath as he pulled it down. The fresh, crisp morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine. The world outside looked peaceful, bathed in the early morning glow. The birds were starting to chirp. It was like nothing had happened. But then, as we crawled out of the tent, still trembling, we saw it leading from the very edge of the dense woods, right up to the side of our tent, was a clear, disturbing trail in the damp earth. It was a wide, shallow furrow, as if something heavy and irregular had been dragged along. And at intervals, pressed into the soil beside this furrow, were unmistakable imprints. They weren't paw prints. They weren't boot prints. They were long, slender indentations, tapering at one end like the marks of bare fingers. Not human fingers, though. These looked too long, too skeletal. And at the very edge of our tent, where the scratching had been, the ground was disturbed, and embedded in the soft earth were a few tiny, splintered pieces of what looked like old, sun-bleached bone. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't need to. We packed up our sight in a blur, working with a frantic, silent urgency. We left the half-eaten marshmallows, the unwashed pot, everything that wasn't essential. We just wanted to get out. As we drove away, leaving Campground 13 behind, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The clearing looked benign now, almost inviting in the morning light. But I knew better. We knew better. We were not alone out there that night. And whatever was lurking in those woods, dragging its burden, whispering its mournful, possessive words, had been watching us. It had been waiting. And the thought of it, still out there, in the quiet, secluded heart of the forest, still sends a shiver down my spine every time I think of the smell of pine and damp earth. It was the summer of 2018, and I, like so many others, was chasing that perfect Instagram shot, that feeling of truly escaping the concrete jungle. My destination? Glacier National Park. The kind of place where the air itself feels cleaner, sharper. I'd arrived early, planning to spend a full week immersing myself in the vastness. My first few days were incredible. I hiked the well-trodden paths, saw hidden waterfalls, and felt insignificant in the most liberating way possible beneath those towering peaks. But by day 4, a familiar itch started. I wanted something more. Something fewer people had experienced. Flipping through a worn, dog-eared park map I'd bought from a roadside stand, not the official one from the visitor center, I noticed something odd. Tucked away in a corner, almost an afterthought, was a faint, dotted line. It wasn't on any of the official maps, nor was it mentioned in any of the park brochures. Below it, scrawled in what looked like faded pencil, were 2 words. Whispering Pines. Intrigued, I asked a park ranger about it later that afternoon. He was a gruff, stocky man with a beard that could have hidden a small bird. When I pointed to the map, his face, usually a road map of sun-worn cheer, tightened. That ain't an official trail, he said, his voice dropping a notch. Best stick to the marked paths. He even took a step back, as if the map itself was radiating something unpleasant. His reaction, rather than deterring me, only fueled my curiosity. The next morning, armed with my backpack, plenty of water, and a fully charged phone, optimistic, I set out. I found the trailhead exactly where the unofficial map indicated. It was less a trail and more a deer path, partially overgrown, almost swallowing itself back into the earth. No signs, no markers, just the slender opening between 2 dense thickets of fir trees. The initial part of the hike was peaceful, almost idyllic. The air grew cooler as I ventured deeper, the sounds of distant traffic fading into a whisper of wind through the pines. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. There was a unique scent here, too, not just pine, but something earthy, damp, like old leaves and rich soil. It was quiet, too quiet even for a forest. The usual chirping birds and rustling squirrels seemed absent. About an hour in, the trees started changing. They grew taller, their branches reaching up like skeletal fingers, some of them devoid of needles, their bark looking bleached and ancient. The path became even less defined, often disappearing altogether, forcing me to rely on stray flattened leaves or a broken twig to guide my way. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like a low, mournful sigh carried on the wind. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, but too deep, too resonant to be human. I stopped, my heart thumping against my ribs. The air grew colder, and I could swear I smelled something else now, something metallic, like rain on rusted iron. I pushed on, drawn by an unnerving compulsion. The sighs grew louder, forming a chorus of despair that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the trees themselves. It wasn't the wind, the air was still. It felt as though the trees were alive, each grown a wordless lament. And then I started noticing things. Shapes, not defined but impressions. In the gaps between the gnarled branches, in the tangled roots that snaked across the path, I saw fleeting glimpses of figures. Tall, slender, motionless. They were there and then they were gone, like reflections in dark water. My breath hitched. My mind, usually so logical, screamed. There was no explanation. My rational brain tried to tell me it was just the light playing tricks or my imagination running wild. But my gut, cold and tight, knew differently. The path opened into a clearing, a bowl-shaped depression surrounded by the tallest, most ancient-looking pines I had ever seen. Their branches, instead of reaching upwards, drooped, almost touching the ground, forming a dark, enclosed space. This had to be Whispering Pines. The sighs here were deafening, a cacophony of sorrow that resonated in my chest. And then I saw them. Not glimpses now, they were undeniably there. Scattered amongst the trees, barely visible in the perpetual twilight of the clearing, were what looked like human forms. But they weren't moving. They were simply standing, immobile. Their bodies seemed stretched, elongated, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, as if listening to some unheard song. Their skin, where I could make it out, had the pale, mottled look of dead wood. They were part of the trees, or the trees were part of them. I couldn't tell. A cold dread deeper than any fear I'd ever known washed over me. It wasn't the fear of being attacked, but the terrifying realization that I was witnessing something profoundly wrong, something that defied all natural laws. They weren't hostile, not actively, but their presence was a silent, suffocating accusation. My instincts, which had been overridden by curiosity, roared back to life. Every cell in my body screamed to run. I spun around, backtracking frantically, tripping over roots I hadn't noticed before. The sighs followed me, growing louder, more insistent, transforming into something that sounded almost like whispers, calling my name. My name. Not just a general sound, but a distinct, hushed utterance of my own name, carried on that icy breath. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached and gave out, sending me sprawling onto the rough forest floor. I lay there, gasping, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. The whispers, though fainter, still echoed in my ears. I scrambled up, more determined than ever, and ran blindly until I finally burst out of the dense, silent forest and stumbled onto the official trail, populated by other hikers, their mundane chatter a sudden, blessed cacophony. I never looked back. I hiked directly to my car, drove straight out of the park, and didn't stop until I was hundreds of miles away. I threw away that unofficial map, shredding it into tiny pieces. I still think about whispering pines, about those silent, sorrowful figures. What were they? Lost souls? Ancient guardians? A manifestation of the forest's own pain? I don't know, and I never want to find out. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, or when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think I can still hear them. The faint, mournful sigh, followed by a whisper of my name. It's a sound that reminds me that some places aren't meant to be found. Some secrets are best left buried deep within the earth, unlisted, unheard. Have you ever had an unsettling experience in a national park, something that just felt off? Share your stories below. The more chilling, the better. The smell of pine needles and damp earth is something I'll never forget. It clings to my memory, along with a chill that has nothing to do with the mountain air. That summer, I decided to tackle the High Sierra Trail, specifically the section through Sequoia National Park. I'd spent countless hours planning, poring over maps, and packing my gear. I'd always loved the solitude of the mountains, the way the vastness made everything else shrink into insignificance. My first few days were pure bliss. Crisp mornings, challenging but rewarding climbs, and evenings spent under a canopy of stars so bright you felt you could reach out and touch them. I was on my way to Bear Paw Meadow. The trail ascended steadily towards Bear Gulch, a notoriously rugged stretch, but one I was excited to experience. As I climbed higher, the trees grew denser, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers against the sky. The air grew colder, even in the afternoon sun, carrying a faint, earthy scent, not unpleasant, just different. I remember stopping for a water break, pulling out my map to check my progress. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Faint, like the wind rustling through leaves, but distinct. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I looked around, scanning the dense undergrowth. Nothing, just the quiet hum of insects and the distant caw of a raven. I told myself it was just the wind, playing tricks on my ears. The altitude was probably making me a little lightheaded. I took a deep breath, shook it off, and kept moving. The whispers continued, though. Intermittent at first, then more frequent. Sometimes it sounded like a hushed conversation, just out of earshot. Other times, it was more like a sigh, long and mournful. It felt as though someone was walking just behind me, always a few steps out of sight. I'd stop abruptly, turn around, and see nothing but the winding trail disappearing into the forest. My heart would pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I tried to rationalize it. The wind, echoes from the rock faces, my imagination running wild in the solitude, but the feeling never left. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a persistent awareness that I was not alone. The vastness of the wilderness, which had once felt comforting, now felt oppressive, as if something was watching me from every shadow. The air grew heavy, like before a storm, even though the sky was perfectly clear. As I neared the summit of Bear Gulch, the whispers intensified. They seemed to swirl around me, closer now, almost brushing against my ears. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was undeniably sad and hungry, a deep, gnawing hunger. My pace quickened, my eyes darting nervously from side to side. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, sent a jolt of terror through me. I gripped my hiking poles tighter, my knuckles white. I distinctly remember the silence that fell as I finally crossed over the ridge and started my descent. The whispers abruptly stopped. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. A wave of relief washed over me, so profound it almost made me dizzy. I convinced myself it was the pressure of the climb, the exhaustion, the isolation. My mind playing tricks. That night, camped at Bear Paw Meadow, I slept fitfully. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my tent. I kept waking up, convinced I heard something outside, the soft padding of footsteps just beyond the canvas. I peered out, seeing only the moonlit trees, their shadows long and distorted. I told myself it was deer or a squirrel. Anything but what my gut was screaming at me. The next morning, I packed up quickly, eager to get off the mountain. As I walked, I began to notice things. Small things at first. My shoelaces, despite being double knotted, would come undone. My water bottle, securely fastened, would somehow shift and clang against my backpack. Little annoyances, easily dismissed, but then the smells started. Not the pleasant pine and earth of the forest, something else. A faint, cloying sweetness like decaying flowers. And sometimes, a sharp, metallic tang like old blood. I'd wrinkle my nose, looking around, but there was never anything to explain it. Then, the feeling returned. That chilling awareness that I wasn't alone. It was subtle at first, a prickle on my neck. Then a constant companion, walking just behind me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I could feel its breath on my skin, cold and stale. I could hear the faint, echoing sound of something being dragged, a soft scrape, scrape, scrape just behind my heels. I never turned around. I couldn't. The fear was paralyzing. I just kept walking, faster and faster, my eyes fixed on the path ahead, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. Each step was a desperate prayer. When I finally reached the trailhead and saw my car, a profound sense of exhaustion washed over me. I practically threw my pack into the trunk, got in, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Nothing but the winding road disappearing into the trees. But just for a second, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement just at the edge of the forest. A tall, gaunt figure, blurred by distance, standing perfectly still. And then it was gone. I didn't look back again. That hike was years ago, but the memory, the feeling, has never truly left me. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I smell that cloying sweetness or that metallic tang. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel a prickle on the back of my neck and a faint, stale breath on my skin. I never feel truly alone anymore. I often wonder what it was, that presence in Bear Gulch. What was it that followed me down from the mountain? And more terrifyingly, what does it want? I tell myself it's just the memory, just my imagination, but the lingering presence, that cold, constant awareness tells me otherwise. It's still here, and it's still watching. The wilderness holds many secrets, and as we've heard tonight, not all of them are meant for human ears. If you dare to delve deeper into the terrifying unknown, subscribe to our channel and join us for every new journey into fear.